All right, now let's take this to the next level. Instead of hard coding this hello world here, I want to display a value dynamically. So here in the counter class, we need to add a property, call it state, and set it to an object. State is a special property in React components, and basically it's an object that includes any data that this component needs. So in this case, let's add a property in this object, call it count, and set it to 0. Now here we could have a complex object. For example, we could have an address that could have a street property like this. So basically this state object includes any data that this component needs. In this example, all we need is a count property. So let's simplify this. Now I'm going to replace h1 with a span. So I've selected h1 and I'm pressing Command and D. Now we have multiple cursors. Let's change both instances to span. Done. Now let's remove hello world. Here we want to render something dynamically. To do that, we add curly braces. And in between these curly braces, we can add any valid JavaScript expressions. So if you want to render the value of the count property here, we would write code like this. This, to reference the current object, dot state, dot count. Now save the changes. You can see the result here. So this is our count. If I change this to 1, save the changes, now we see 1 here. Beautiful. Now, as I told you, in between these curly braces, we can write any valid JavaScript expressions. An expression is something that produces a value. For example, we can write something like 2 plus 2, save the changes, we get 4 here. Or we can call a function that returns a value. For example, let's add a method in this class, call it format count. In this method, we want to check the value of the count property. If it's 0, we want to return 0 as a string. Otherwise, we want to return the value of the count property itself. So we can do something like this. Return this.state.count. If it equals 0, we're going to return the label 0. Otherwise, this.state.count. Now, before looking at the result, I want to quickly improve this code. Look, we have this repetition of this.state.count. Whenever you have code like this, that's a perfect opportunity to use object destructuring that you learned about in the last section. So we can destructure this object and pick the count property. Like this. Const, we add curly braces, count, we set it to this.state. So we're picking the count property of this object and storing it in a separate constant called count. Now, I'm going to select this expression, press Command and D, so both these expressions are selected. Now let's change both of them to count. That is better. Save the changes. And finally, back here, let's call this.format count. Now, save the changes. So currently our count is 1. That's why we see 1 here. Let's change this to 0. Save the changes. We get the label 0. Now, to take this to the next level, we can also return a JSX expression here. Because as I told you before, JSX expressions get compiled to React elements. So here, instead of returning a plain text, we can return h1 with 0 as the inner text. So save the changes. Now we have an h1 here. So this is what I want you to understand. JSX expressions are just like normal JavaScript objects. You can return them from a function. You can pass them to a function. You can also use them as the value of a constant or a variable. So here I can define a constant and set it to a JSX expression. That's perfectly fine. So now let's simplify this code. We don't need this anymore. And here on line 19, I just want to return 0 as a plain text. Next, we're going to look at setting attributes.